Year 11, we're on to question 4 now. I've just had a nightmare and recorded the video and it wasn't quite right, so I'm going to have to go again. But as a result, some of the stuff I've already written on here, so I'm going to talk you through it, but I won't always be writing live. Okay, so I looked at question 4 and I thought that actually it might be better if we've tried question 3 first, because question 3 gives us quite a bit of information that we could use in question 4. So this is my question 3, we did yesterday or the day before with your teacher, and I know that there's probably quite a lot in there in that section that I could use. And the reason for that is that examiners, they don't get sent your entire paper, they get sent individual questions, and therefore you can write something that you've written in another question again, because they won't know. Also, it has to be related, so if the question focus is really similar, then you absolutely can use the same idea if it's relevant. So I think I'd suggest question 5, then 3, then 4, then 1, 2. So if I look at this question, the first thing I did was remember that I have to look at both sources and all of the. It doesn't mean I have to write about everything, 'cause I can't, but it means that I probably need to make sure I'm talking about as much of it as I can, maybe how it develops or the kind of key themes that are coming out of the text, rather than just one sentence. And then I'm looking at their perspectives on surfing. Surfing is then really similar, if you look back at my question 3, to this question. Surfers and the sea, which means things like the surfers are triumphant does link to surfing, because I can say that it demonstrates a sense of achievement. Things like the sea being quite dangerous does link to surfing, because I can say that surfing is quite a dangerous activity, but that the surfers are skilled. So I'm pretty pleased with that, because the focus is very similar. I'm obviously looking at the differences, it's almost always differences. And then perspectives is me looking at their feelings, and that's what I've written down here. It's about feelings and attitudes. It wasn't in question 2, because in question 2 we were just looking at what have we learned about surfboards. But here, the interesting thing for us is to look at how does the writer feel about surfing. Not just what do we know about surfing, but how do they feel? What are their attitudes towards it? The next bullet point's about methods. It will always be very similar. Methods means techniques for our purposes. So this time, unlike question 2, we need to think about what the writer's doing with language, perhaps with structure, anything the writer does on purpose, any techniques. Finally, we need support with references, and that's obviously quotes. So I'm going to look at source A. And as I said, I've already written on it. So I'll talk you through it. I wrote at the top feel, because I want to look at feelings. And how the writers show me their viewpoint, their perspectives. Now what I did is I went through this first paragraph and thought, actually this is just information, that he'd gone to the beach and he'd not seen a surfer before, and this morning they were surfing. There's no feelings there, there's no personal opinions, so I didn't highlight anything. And that's fine. Remember, I can't write about every single paragraph and every single thing. Then I looked at the next paragraph and I read it, but this one morning I took the first bus to the beach, walked out onto the Manhattan Pier, looked down and saw these bronzed gods, all in incredibly good shape, happier and healthier than anybody I'd ever seen. Now I've started to notice a thought, an emotion. Calling them bronzed gods is an opinion, and I've written here that it's a metaphor, because we're calling those surfers gods. They're bronzed gods. It's quite interesting because it makes me think almost of Greek mythology, like an Adonis, a sculpture almost that's like chiseled, somebody that's got a very traditionally sort of athletic body, and they're in good shape and they're happy and healthy. So it's kind of a holistic view that they're in good shape, but they're also just really happy. Maybe demonstrating that surfing is really beneficial to humans, to people, because they look good but they feel good too. And then here I said about this linking almost to a semantic field now, that they're bronze, that they're gods, that they're in good, that they're happy, that they're healthy, and that creates a semantic field of positivity, but also maybe a semantic word of life. It's almost, they're really full of life. So a word for that would be vitality. So I'm going to write that this side. There's like a semantic field of vitality where they're full of life. And I can kind of add to that here that they sat astride their boards laughing, again, adding to that sense of joy, excitement, positivity. And then I carried on reading. He feels like it's almost like he was on the board himself, paddling for the swell, sliding into the wave, coming to my feet, angling the board down that long wall of green water. It was almost as if I already knew that feeling in my bones. So what I've written here is that it's a metaphor here, because saying that you know the feeling in your bones is metaphorical. We don't really feel it in our bones, but we use it quite commonly in the English language to imply we feel it deeply. Like for example, I love Shakespeare to my bones would mean that I really deeply love reading Shakespeare. It's hyperbolic. It's quite over the top to say that you feel something in your bones. You truly know it. So I have written here that it's a hyperbolic metaphor. We can say metaphor, that's fine. And then to get sort of that additional terminology, we can say it's a hyperbolic metaphor. And here, from that day on, I knew that surfing was for me. I've circled these two words here, the verb knew, because what that shows me is that this man is certain, like he has certainty about his passion for surfing. It's not like, oh yeah, that looked all right, I might give it a go. I knew, I felt it in my bones, it was for me. It's very certain, it's further hyperbolic. And what I've written here for new is that it's repetition, but also, as we discussed last time, it's diacope, because that's another way of saying that there's repetition of a word. What I've written here is that when we make a statement that we show we're really sure of it, for example, if I said, I love Shakespeare, that would be a declarative sentence. So a declarative is when you declare something. It comes from the root word declare. And it's a type of sentence, and your teacher can go through the types of sentences with you. There's sort of 4 key ones. And a declarative is a certain statement. You're not asking a question. You are absolutely sure of it. Now, that to me links back to his certainty. He knows, he's sure, which kind of demonstrates his commitment to that sport, and maybe other words like dedication, but also his eagerness to experience it. Okay. Now, in terms of a declarative statement, just to sort of link it back to the literature, because I do like to do that when I'm doing my language. I like to try and revise my literature at the same time because it makes it doubly useful. A declarative sentence would be, I will work harder, or Napoleon is always right. And hopefully you've heard those quotes and thought, oh, that's Boxer in Animal Farm. And what's really interesting is that George Orwell makes Boxer use declarative sentences, even though he's wrong. And what is a really nice point to make in the Animal Farm exam is that Orwell actually uses declarative statements, declarative sentences, whatever you want to write, to show the level of brainwashing and what we might call indoctrination that Boxer has experienced. He is so sure that Napoleon's always right, and so sure that he needs to work harder because of propaganda, because of Squealer, because of the pigs, and because he's not realised himself that he's being exploited. So the declarative sentences are actually quite sad for a Boxer because it demonstrates his certainty and the fact that he's actually incorrect. Okay. Alright, so in this section there was a bit of just information. There's several surfers. That's not an opinion, there's no feelings there, that's just a sort of fact. He was just a kid, 16 years old. He turned around, backwards on his board, shows off a bit for the people. I was just dazzled. So I've thought this was quite an interesting phrase. I was dazzled by it. The adjective dazzled to me is very interesting. I know that I've analysed that in the poem Bayonet Charge because the quote dazzled with rifle fire. So I'm thinking to myself, what does that mean, the word dazzled? Well, it's kind of blinding, isn't it? It's like something is in you, like blinding your vision, that it's beautiful. It's, in my head, I always think of dazzled almost like stars, that they're so bright and fiery. They're mesmerising. They're really special. You might feel awed. Okay, so I'm just kind of doing my magic circles here. It's also in a first person narrative. I'm really getting an insight that this guy is so interested in surfing from the minute he sees it. Again, this is a declarative sentence. I was dazzled is declarative. He's certain of it. It leads back to all the things he was saying earlier, about really being gripped, being addicted almost right from the start. Okay, then we've got, once I discovered there was such a thing as surfing, I began plotting my chance to try it. I used to stand out on the surf and wait until one of the surfers lost his board. I highlighted the words plotting and wait because I thought plotting kind of implies trying to make a plan, trying to organise something quickly. And the fact that he's willing to wait implies also desperation and commitment. All these things are right here. So what I'm starting to notice now is that I've kind of got a semantic field of desperation or eagerness. In an ideal world, we need at least 3 words for a semantic field. So I've got plotting and I've got wait. And then we've got a bit of information just about how much it weighs. That's not an opinion, that's not a feeling or perspective. I would jump back up, scramble the board, hop on, paddle it 10 feet before the owner snatched it back, thanks kid, and paddled away. Again, this kind of jumping onto the board the minute that it drops off, so when it washes up, it means that the surf has fallen off the board. This kid grabs the board and immediately goes out on it until the owner brings it back, says, oh, I'll have that back. So this kind of jumping, waiting, plotting, it's all very eager. So I've written a semantic field of desperation or eagerness. This section here I didn't highlight because it's just about what the boards are made of, and that doesn't really give me any perspective on it. It just tells me facts. And then we go to here. Again, I've got some information just about how it's made and how big it is. And then I go to this section. When the guy came out of the water, dragging the board behind him, I asked if I could borrow it for a while. He looked at me like, get lost, kid. But when he sat down on the beach, I pestered him until he finally shrugged and nodded towards the board. So I've highlighted asked and pestered. Pestered, to me, is nagging. And asked is also requesting. So all of these words now start to link to this. He's desperate, he's asking, he's waiting, he's pestering, he's plotting. He's literally obsessed. He's almost like addicted to the idea of surfing. He's almost got an obsession with it. Straight away, as soon as he sees it. And then on the last page, I left this bit out because I felt like that was just about him going out in the water, and it doesn't really say. It says he was gliding, which is, I like the word, but he doesn't really say about how that made him feel. But this bit does. As the waves started to break behind me, I looked back, completely panicked. I hadn't thought that far ahead yet. We've got an exclamatory sentence there, the exclamation mark. My first impulse was to bail, so I jumped out in front of the board, spread eagled. I washed up on the beach and I dragged myself to the dry sand and lay there groaning. All of this is giving me the kind of sense that he's had a failure, that it's not gone to plan. He had the excitement at the beginning, and now we've got an incomplete activity where he wasn't able to do. He thought, oh, brilliant, I'll get straight on that board and it'll be fine. But he could do it for a few seconds, but then he wasn't unable to do it. So the difficulty, I guess, of surfing. And the fact he feels like maybe he's had a small failure. Now, when I read this, I read it quite quickly because I don't have time to read every single word. I've got nothing from here and I've got nothing from here. It doesn't matter. I just need a few bits. I know I've got enough to say now. I just don't want to waste too much time. You've already read the sources because we've done question 2. But if you do question 4 first, which I would advise, you won't have read them yet. So you read them like I do, just sort of skim through. You can't talk about absolutely everything. And that's fine. Okay, so we're on to source B. I'm going to use the source that I did yesterday, because it's already got all my annotations on it from question 3, which is great. So, some of the bits I've already highlighted. Our host came in to say that at Grantis Bay the national sport of surf bathing was going on, and a large party of us went down to the beach for 2 hours to enjoy it. It was really a most exciting pastime, and in a rough sea requires immense nerve. I'm pretty pleased with this because it's backing up exactly what I said in question 3, where I said that the argument seemed to be that surfers are really skilled, but the sea is really dangerous. And here I'm getting the idea that the sea is quite dangerous because it requires bravery, but it's a really enjoyable and exciting pastime, like it says here, with when I wrote about a semantic field of enjoyment and triumph. So I feel like, yeah, I'm pretty pleased. My question 3 was probably correct, as in I've come up with quite a good point about how the writer is using language. I can use those ideas again. In this section, I didn't find anything. This is, again, very factual. There's local people swimming. Only 40 had the board, or not more than 40. Men carrying the boards under their arms. I'm not getting a lot about attitudes or perspectives. And the same for sort of this one. The wave comes and it hits the ground. The swimmers pose themselves and then they jump off. Excuse me. The only thing that's really opinionated is that their movements are dexterous, which means that they're good at moving, that they are skilled, which kind of just links to all the things I've already said. Then I've got this section, I don't need to reread it. I already know what my main ideas were, and I'm probably going to use them again. I think that this bit demonstrates surfing is exciting, dangerous, but a skilled activity. Loads of the similar ideas that I'm going to have talked about in question 3. And then I carry on. The great art seems to be to mount the breaker precisely at the right time and to keep exactly on its keel just before it breaks. 2 or 3 athletes who stood erect on their boards as they swept exultingly shorewards were received with ringing cheers by the crowd. Okay, so again, it's celebrated. I like that idea. However, here I've circled it because exultingly comes from the same root word as exultant. So it comes from the same idea. Now, that is not quite repetition because those words are different. But they come from the same root word, which is to exult, which is to celebrate, to enjoy, to be triumphant, to be victorious. And I think then we can use this technique called polyptoton, which you might not have heard of. Now, polyptoton is repetition of words with the same root. So, for example, when Juliet they believe Juliet's dead, the nurse says things like, oh, woe, 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 and that's repetition. But then she says, oh, woeful day. So she's using words with the same root word. It's not super common. It's just not a super important technique to learn, but it is a nice version of repetition because there's lots of types of different types of repetition. And polyptoton is, it's got the root, but it's not the same word. Okay, so I might talk about that. Then I have got maybe that surfing, I might say something about the ringing cheers, the roars of laughter, and the shouts. So I've got cheers, laughter and shouts, and roars. I am getting sound. Okay, there's a lot of imagery of sound here. So I know that that is called auditory imagery. And what that's showing me about surfing, that the writer's opinion of surfing is that it's really enjoyable, not just for the surfers, but for the spectators. Maybe I'll talk about that. And again, it's enjoyable for spectators, but it's also nerve-wracking because we've got the section up here where it says we expected to see them dashed to pieces. We expected to see them dashed to pieces. They were on the verge of engulfment. And then here we've got I held my breath in terror, thinking they were smothered or dashed to pieces. Now we've literally had dashed to pieces mentioned twice now. So that's a nice form of repetition. And I might talk about that because the idea of dashed to pieces is quite hyperbolic. That not the board, but the people are going to be like obliterated by the sea. That they're going to be dead. It's very hyperbolic, but shows the real peril and the danger of surfing. Very extreme. I'd probably say hyperbolic again. But then they see the heads of the objects of my anxiety bobbing about, and again we've got bobbing, that was said earlier. The joy of the surfers, waiting for another chance. The shore was thronged with spectators, and the presence of the elite of Hilo stimulated the swimmers to wonderful exploits. I enjoyed the afternoon thoroughly. And again, enjoyment. That is also a declarative sentence there. Absolute certainty. I